Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Invisible Movement webinar series. This week, we have Isaac, Lamar, and Nancy with us to talk about their exciting programs. Uh, my name is Paul Chang. I'm a lecturer at Cal State LA. My expertise is relating to human trafficking, and what my line of study is to talk about a human trafficking ecosystem, where it is human trafficking systems do not occur in isolation. It's a system. It's a system itself. It's a system that takes advantage of vulnerabilities. And if we understand that this is a system that uh, whenever there's a person who is vulnerable, there is a system that naturally attracts to those vulnerabilities. And in many cases, those vulnerabilities become progressively worse as these systems naturally exploit these vulnerabilities. There's a whole entire ecosystem built around it. Today we're going to be listening, we're going to be hearing about some about the exciting work that's being done to prevent these vulnerabilities, um, again, these networks to taking advantage of these vulnerabilities in our communities. We have great speakers here today and to share their experiences. But before we get started, I'm going to hand it over to Isaac uh, to do some introductions. Isaac, take it away, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Isaac McKeithen. Um, I am the actually founder of Removing the Blinders, which is a buyer accountability program here, getting its foothold in California and working its way across the country. I am also the Southern California regional leader for the EPIC project, and that is a buyer disruption program that is working nationwide. It's a nonprofit we've actually been in working in this space since 2013. I think that's around 14, 15 years now. So I'll be talking to you from that perspective today. And I am going to pass it over to Miss Nancy to introduce
Good
herself.
good afternoon. My name is Nancy Lambert. I'm a psychiatric rehabilitation counselor, and my background, I'm a former federal parole and probation officer and worked with the formerly incarcerated um, at a manufacturing company in the role of HR and recruitment and social worker in a sense. After hiring, um, folks would come in with a lack of soft skills and social skills. So my job was to help them acclimate back into society. And my tag was, my job is to help you keep your job. So we would work on just showing up to work on time and the reasons why those things were important and valuing themselves again and working on their terminology. Things like, why would they use terms like baby mama, and distancing themselves from society to keep themselves safe. But while they did that, they also would be hurting themselves and devaluing human beings and not recognizing their value, meaning them and women and and also young men, because they were worthless and they weren't human. So we talked about how to elevate. Once we elevated them and found value in them, then they could then transfer that onto other people because they felt more safe, if that makes sense. So that was my big project over there, other than helping them keep their job and not going back to prison, because when you have a job, you have money, And when you have money, you feel more secure. Regardless, when I used to work with the exploiters in down in the Crenshaw area, we would talk about, I get why you do the drugs. I get why you're transporting this, but maybe you could lose the girls. And they'd say, absolutely not, because they didn't see the girls as human. They saw them as a way just to make money. And that's a real problem, because they aren't human. And so I think we have to look at the definition of what human trafficking is and why they do it and what their goal is, and and change that, and how you do that, their mindset of learning that people are human, and when you meet them, use their name. Continually use a name, because it makes people human. When you go out and meet your restaurant person, her name is Sally. You don't know what her life is. You have no idea if she's being trafficked. You don't know that. Yes, she may have a job waiting on you, but you don't know what's going on behind closed doors, and you don't know what's happening to that young man who's serving you, maybe at the dry cleaners behind the counter. Use his name, and then develop that relationship, and then things may happen by trusting you and telling you he's being exploited. These are very important things, to be able to humanize people instead of dehumanizing them and pretend it's not happening.
Thank you, Nancy. You brought up a very important uh, point, and I think we have to understand that uh, sometimes there's no clear defining line between victim and perpetrator. In many cases, forced criminality is, and I think we've seen this happen in many cases where both the perpetrator, who victimizes others, have been in the past been victimized or are currently being victimized, and in many ways that true dividing line isn't there. And in in your experience at Justice, and as a probation officer, um, how have you managed to work with individuals who, you know, have had obviously come in with the criminal justice system, but in many ways, when you hear the more nuanced stories, um, they're actually more it's actually a more complex situation, and their environment played an extremely important role too in where they are at, and their current environment makes it more as just as difficult to get out of those that situation. So it's so what I'm trying to get at is the environmental influence on both recidivism, but also the re-victimization of a individual.
Well, imagine your whole family revolves around your gang, because you don't have a family, and that gang raised you. And maybe you know how to read, maybe you don't. But your defense mechanism is you know everything, because that's all you got. And that's how you've lived your whole life. And your adrenaline is you've lived. Our brain, we think up here in our executive function, but we live back in our amygdala by our brainstem, because we are primitive. Our brains are primitive. Men are hunters, and men are one item folk. And that's, if I insult you, please forgive me, but it is what it is. And women, we are gatherers, so we're better at multitasking. That's why when we go out to a restaurant and I sit with my boyfriend, he goes, how do you know what's going on all over there? And you know every single conversation. I'm a multitasker, and I'm nosy. I don't know why. It just is. And you can't do that, and nor do you want to. You are supposed to be my protector. And when that equation changes, and you come out of the womb as this beautiful, perfect little being, supposedly, and then somebody screws that up, and it's not the baby. And when you hear the perpetrator say, well, it's her fault or his fault, and she's 4 years old, what happened to that thinking? It's very, very, very troubling, to say the least, and terrifying. Terrifying. When I interviewed a gentleman and he told me it was the 4 year old's fault, it is inconceivable to me to think that it's obviously ludicrous. And we had a very poignant conversation and about his warped thinking. But his goal was not to get me on his side. His goal was to relive the act because of reliving the act. It's a complete turn on again. And that's what people, when they're in the helping field, forget. They allow the person to relive that moment. No, stop talking because it's disgusting. And you don't need to relive that act because you're re-victimizing me, even though I'm not the one being raped or trafficked, but you are, and you're re-victimizing yourself. There's no reason to relive that again. We already know what you did. Stop talking. Stop. Now it's time to either get better or get out. But if you want to get better and you want to work, I'm your gal. But if you want to have recidivism and be, I'm not a good person, I have a place for you as well. And we all know where that is. And let's hope that doesn't happen. But you can't, you have to help rethink those thoughts. But if they're in a state of fight or flight, which is in the amygdala, we have to help them get out of that because they can't think in that executive function state. It's very hard. So it's our job to be knowledgeable enough to know how to do that. And Lamar, you heard that talk yesterday.
Yeah.
It's hard, but hard doesn't mean it's impossible.
In your role, just going back to, I want to separate your two roles. Your first role as a probation officer, and as a probation officer, you're almost like an ethnographer, a person who really spends a lot of time with the person who is on parole. Um, what are some of the most telltale signs that this person had the vulnerabilities that faces that are common in that you see in the formerly incarcerated community?
Isolation.
I s-
When you take somebody and you tell them you can't be with your family, the gang that you grew up with, or who you ran around with before you went to prison, and now your conditions of parole or probation, you have to cut off everybody. And if you don't, you're going to go back to prison. I mean, that's like cutting off your drugs. It's terrifying. Now, who do I talk to? Because I don't have any skills. I don't have any social skills. I don't have any soft skills. I've tatted up completely in order to live in prison because I had to pick a side, right? So everybody knows who I am. Where do I go? Who do I hang with? Who do I trust? So that's terrifying. Who's going to hire me? Look at me. So what is my role? Either I can be a hard knocks kind of parole officer and say, well, that's on you, tough. You got where you got because of your behavior. Or I can be a decent human being and say, what I used to do was I'd show up at your house and I'd say, obviously you're depressed because look at your house, it's filthy. So here's a garbage bag and let's start cleaning. And they'd be like, I don't even understand what you're doing. I said, yeah, you do. It's called human kindness. So we're going to clean the house and then I'm going to leave and you're going to take a shower and then I'm going to come back and then you're going to get in my car and we're going to go look for a job. And they're like, why? I go, why? Because I'm your parole officer and I'm a nice person. So get over yourself. And they'd just be like, and obviously I'm quite blunt, but I like blunt because you don't have to figure out what I'm trying to say. And then we'd find a job, knock on wood. Would it be the best job in the world? No. But it's right where you're supposed to be right now at this time in your life. And it's a building block. And you'll get something better. But we're going to get you soft skills, we're going to get you trained, and all these wonderful things if you choose to let me help you make that happen. And then guess what? We're going to go to counseling because I'm not your therapist. I'm your PO. So let's get you into counseling so you can get rid of some of that garbage that's going around in those tapes in your head because they're not true. And then a great example, I'd say to the guys, they'd say, I'm really trying to be a great dad. And I go, God, that's wonderful. Could you try and pick up that pencil for me? And they'd go to pick it up. And I go, no, 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 no. Try to pick that up for me. And I'd say it over. And one gentleman started to cry. And he said, I don't understand what you're saying to me. And I said, either you're going to pick that pencil up or you're not. Either you're going to be a good father or you're not. So you're doing it. You're not trying. So get rid of the word try. You're doing it. Congratulations. And he goes, oh, yeah, you're doing it. So these are the kinds of reframing their verbiage helps so much because they've not heard that before. They've been afraid to be good, to feel good. And that's our job to help them know that.
Wow, what you that's amazing. And what I heard was you're rebuilding their sense of agency. You're rebuilding that agency that they lost. You're
Hope so.
rebuilding that identity that has eroded. There was a dependency that they had on the gangs and the environment. You showed them there's another option out there.
It's
This is
them. They are the option.
They are that option. Yes, exactly. And this is the amazing work that you've done, and I think that's what we need is a guide that guidance sometimes is not there. And I think that guidance, the lack of that guidance is what really causes a lot of the recidivism and but also
Well, I
um,
think people are afraid of their caseload or the people that they see on the street, and sometimes rightly so. But one guy said, he goes, "What do you, very angrily, he said, what do you see when you look at me?" And I see the cutest guy I've ever met. I go, "You've got the cutest little dimples." I go, "But I know what you want me to see." But I said, I don't see that. But I said, maybe if I saw you in a dark alley and you punched me in the face, but I probably wouldn't see you then either because you would have knocked me out. I said, but I don't see that. So quit working on that. I said, if you want to be an actor, go to Hollywood. But right now you're adorable. And he's like, no. I go, but you are. You're cute. And he's like, no, that's not the answer. I go, what do you want me to say to you? I go, I can't. I go, you're just too cute. Look at the dimples. And no one had ever seen, because no one's ever told me I'm cute. I go, well, you are. You're cute. So
and
that was nice. It was very sweet, and he was adorable.
when you rebuild that person's sense and give them that confidence when they go out into the job force, can you talk about give us some advice about the your experience in the as an HR in HR? Can you go into some advice that you would give?
When the men would call me up, they would use verbiage that one doesn't typically use when you're calling an HR person, and then so I would correct that and say, well, I'm happy that Johnny referred you, but Johnny already has a job. You don't. So let's start again because they would be very clear on why they were calling. And I say, well, you don't have a job, so why don't you tell me about the job you're calling. And they would say, I don't, never, no. And I'd go, okay, that's okay. So here's the idea. Why don't you hang up, go to our website, look up the position and our mission statement, and then call me back if you're interested in the position. But right now, you don't even know what you're interviewing for. Well, why do I have to hang up? Because I can't interview somebody who doesn't know what they're interviewing for. Well, Johnny said, I don't care. Call me back. And so I would teach them because they didn't know how and they didn't learn it in prison, which is just, that's the miscarriage of justice. They didn't learn how to interview. They didn't learn the law about once they got out of prison about, we have a law in California and in other states, but it's specifically in California. It's called Ban the Box. And it passed in 2018. And what that meant or means is that as an employer, I do not have the right to ask you about your criminal history. So the way I would interview, because they would tell me, because they already knew that we hired the formerly incarcerated, but I would tell them to stop talking and do not tell me. I said, I will find out. Because, if we do background checks or whatever, I said, but don't tell me, because under the conditions of your parole or probation, you can't interview for a position that that's against the conditions of your parole. Like if you committed fraud, you can't, interview at Wells Fargo. Or if you're, if you committed, if you're a child molester, you can't interview at Chuck E. Cheese. And they go, oh, okay, I get it. I said, so don't go to Chuck E. Cheese. And but that would not, I said, so if your employer hires you and then finds out about your criminal record and then denies you the position, they have to give you written notice within 5 days. Well, that employer didn't do that. Should I sue him? No. You should just move on with your life and find a place that wants you. And you, in other words, reconnect your neurons and build a better brain instead of I'm going to get them before they get me. Who cares? When you re-enter the world, people are not going to like you. When you date, that's why you date. It's a big pool. People are going to reject me every single day. I have to figure out, what do I do with that information? It doesn't matter. I already know who I am. And if you don't like me, maybe I have to learn how to be a better person because I did something inappropriate. Or maybe I need to find a better network of people that are healthier and enjoy me and like my personality. These are the positive things to look at. So those are the things that we would talk about. And they'd call back, and then I would teach them how to interview, and I would tell them, please wear a belt when you show up, and how to dress. And I always had a belt in the office. And one gentleman did not show up with a belt, and I complimented him on his choice of underwear and asked him if he was interested in dating. And he was a young boy, and he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, the history of why folks chose not to wear belts in prison. No, what do you mean? And very defensive because his manlyhood was on the line. And I said, well, you're trolling. You're interested in dating. You're looking for a boyfriend. Because I don't know what that means. And I explained in quite detail what that meant. He was horrified. And I said, so if you're not interested in finding a boyfriend today while you're interviewing, I suggest you wear the belt that I'm going to provide for you and learn how to be a nice young man, because this is how we dress in society. I don't want to see your underwear. And my hunch is that you're not interested. Well, maybe you're interested in seeing mine, but not in a formal setting. It's inappropriate. This is how society functions. Pull up your pants. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So those are the things I did, because I don't know who else is going to do it. I know other people do it.
And
But
those life skills Yeah, those life skills are so important, and they
Well, I
need.
don't know why they're not taught in prison
Yeah,
because they hire counselors, they hire rehabilitation counselors.
maybe they need to hire a HR person that actually understands HR, how hiring works, because I think and this goes back to trafficking, and this goes back to what I've seen in on the labor side is um, they always go back to the same staffing agency or the recruiter, and the exploitation becomes a cyclical process, and rather than the exploitation doesn't stop. It cycles recycles itself because we have not done anything to offset their entire ecosystem. What you've done was introduce a basically like a speed bump for them that actually did not that they didn't have that they didn't understand that's there. Once that speed bump is there, they can see, well, wait a minute, there's a lot more around me, a lot more options. So I really think that in itself has so much more impact. And I think we don't recognize that those sometimes those small things will have so much cascading effects downstream in many in situations such as that, and much greater effects down the road.
I just
And
think you start small. They're your children in a sense. You don't start parenting at 14. You start parenting when they come out of the womb. And then you don't, at 14, you go, oh my gosh, what happened? You don't, you're parenting the whole way, hopefully. And then at 14, you can sit down and have a conversation. And these guys, you're parenting in a different way, but it is that because they're not, are they bad people? Some of them, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Some are not good guys. They're not nice people at all. And some have learned behaviors that are not good, but have souls that are like little puppies and are just begging for something. And if they are, especially when they're alone with you, just are sponges and teach me, and what can I do to be better? And it's life changing, and all you have to do is ask. Just ask. Tell me, and they taught me so much. Just and Isaiah, you look like you're dying to say something because
Well, you're leading into our next person on here, Mr. Banks, because you mentioned parenting and kids. So I would love for Lamar to introduce himself, and then there's a question about his organization that I'm pondering. So, Mr. Banks, can you introduce yourself and give us a little insight on where you're coming from?
Yeah, thank you, Isaac. Well, you already know my last name. My first name is Lamar Banks. And actually, I had the wonderful opportunity um, just about, yeah, it's coming up almost 4 years ago, running into higher ground in Anaheim, California. And it was not something that I had initially sought out to do. But I was thinking about trying to do some work at some nonprofit organizations, either on a volunteer basis or see what I can do to help, to be a part of society. And there was two organizations that I was met at this one networking event, and I was able to get their contact information. I reached out to them, and they never responded. And the one organization that I didn't get information from reached out to me, and that was Higher Ground. And so I was able to meet with them, and I went over to their site in Anaheim, and I met the founder, Joe Baldo, a wonderful gentleman. And I walked around and saw what he was doing. And Higher Ground is more like a wraparound. It's a youth and family services, and it's a wraparound type system. So it takes care of kids after school. Maybe both parents are working, so they have a place for the kids to come and do anything from homework to music to science to playing sports, whatever it is that they want to do until their parents can come and pick them up. And then there's also food services, there's counseling services, there's therapeutic services, there's a whole 9 yards that they put together. But it started out with Joe just noticing that he needed to do something. And he saw that in this particular part of town, there was a lot of teenagers, kind of like what you were talking about, Nancy, young boys, 13, 14 years of age, just hanging out and doing bad things. And he just started talking to them, and, he'd buy basketballs for them and hung out with them. And the city of Anaheim noticed it, and then the police department noticed it. And long story short, he was able to secure the area of Lincoln Park in Anaheim, and they were able to provide him some trailers, and the rest is, as we say, history. But during that time, um, Joe had noticed that, by the time they're 14, 15 years of age, they've already had some set patterns in place. And it was very hard to try, going back to what Nancy was saying, is to reorganize and re-educate, just 2 or 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's just almost impossible. So he felt that there had to be some more deeper, intervention. And it was funny that he was thinking that, because at the same time, there was a human trafficking program that was going on within the city of Anaheim. And they were just thinking about talking to him about reaching out to the youth. And so there was a group of people. I don't recall all the names of the individuals, but it was a wonderful group of people, educators in Orange County, and I think part of the California system, that were able to put together a format and some questions on how they could actually go into elementary schools, junior high schools, and high schools and talk about grooming on different levels depending on who you're talking to, so that these young kids can understand when someone is trying to groom them. And so it started out that way. And then, so now what does Joe do? He has to find people that are kids that are in college in the local community or university that need hours as far as reaching out, volunteering, and what have you. And so they took the format that he was given and they gave it to the students, and they were able to put together a 3-day program, which is now 4 days, on grooming and what is human trafficking. And when I had met him, that program had already been going on for several years, and it was growing a lot. And they needed someone at that time to help reach out to the schools who had some kind of I want to say, kind of like what we're doing here. Everybody in this room here, all four of us, we've networked, we've worked with people. They needed someone that knows how to talk to a school counselor, who knows how to talk to a school principal. And I said, hey, I'll do that. I'll do whatever it is I need to do. And so for 2 years, I helped with all of the students that were coming from Chapman University, Biola, um, Fullerton, all the different areas that were looking to help. And we had some very good speakers who actually started doing more in training so that we could do even more. And it's just blossomed out. And then also at the same time, the wonderful folks over at Vanguard University already had something in place, and they were doing something there. So it was working, and it's working great. But here's the thing, because we're talking about such a sensitive issue, it was really hard to try and navigate into certain areas and make people realize how important this is. The thing that we always heard, and I know all three of you can nod your head with this, is that it's not happening here. If we tried to go into a different area, they would always say, oh, no, that's not a problem here. And then literally a month later, you would see in a newspaper about someone in that particular area who happens to be a counselor or a teacher or whatever was doing something wrong. And so we just needed to get these kids to understand what grooming is all about. Because here's the thing. It's so easy to do grooming now because it's just done electronically.
Mm.
And so you could do it at 3 o'clock in the morning when your parents are asleep and you've got your own little phone in the bed and you're talking to someone who you think is another 9-year-old kid and it's not, and they're learning everything about your house, where you live, what time do you go to school? When do you go to McDonald's? What do you like at McDonald's? They're learning everything. And so it was really important that we help the parents in every community understand that. And it's just really blossomed. It's really worked out well. And that's what we do right now. So the educational process to help the kids as early as we can, usually around 9, 10, 11, 12 years of age, as far as grooming. And then when they get into junior high school, we start talking about the levels of trafficking and safe, what do you call it, being online safely, so that they can understand that and protect themselves from that. From there, I met um, uh, several people in the task force. It's a wonderful organization. There's people all over Orange County that are a part of this. I've met the people that are a part of the Orange County task force. We're doing a wonderful job in taking care of that aspect of it. And so my hope is that as we continue to grow, we start to address the other people that are um, the buyers of this situation, so that we can, you snuff out one side and then you snuff out the other. And then when you come to, like what Paul was talking about, this organization, if you don't have anything that's feeding into it, then there's no need for that particular organization. So there you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Lamar. And one of the things you mentioned, and this is an extremely important part, I think, is early intervention and early exposure. What challenges have you had when going trying to bring this topic up in the younger schools and the parents? Um, have you
Well,
faced?
it's there's a lot of different things that happen when you start talking about the word sex. Okay, let's just be real. Um, and it elicits different reactions. So you have the legal aspect. What can you say in the school district? What is allowed and what isn't? You have the religious aspect. Well, I don't want my kids to hear this, and so on and so forth. And then you have the don't need to know crowd, where, well, they don't need to know this because if they what they don't know, they won't know, and what have you. So the challenge is to help them understand, you know, if we don't talk about it and show them how to help themselves, they are already being talked to about it. So whether or not you want to say sex, I guarantee you someone has already said it to them that doesn't have the child's best interest in mind. All of us know, I didn't grow up in the electronic age, but by the time I was 9 years old, there was several people in my class that I knew were getting molested. You just know. You just know. Okay, nobody is that blind to it. So here we are today in electronic age, and you can send pictures to your 9-year-old kid. I don't like that. I don't think it's good, but we can't be blind to this anymore. We need to protect our kids. We just need to take that leap of faith and go out and say, okay, what can we do? And each board, in each community district, each school district, just bring in the parents, get their feedback, and find out what they would want that school district to do. And then that way the program can be tailored in a way that meets the needs of the community. We just can't run from it anymore because it's there, and it's in everybody's face.
And you are using you're at a area Anaheim, and I think right now the OCHTTF Anaheim has the grant, is the lead, and then the Waymakers is the
Yes,
nonprofit. So you work with Lynn Tran over there at
yes, yes.
at Waymakers, and they've got a tremendous team over there. Um,
And I will say, I don't mean to interrupt you, but to Nancy's point, um, I've met judges and going to these meetings, and they understand what you're doing, Nancy. If you ever get a chance to come to some of these meetings, you'll be surprised that they've taken everything that you've said and they're advocates for these kids. They're understanding the nuances of what we need to do. Because when they appear, we got to remember this is a child. Okay. So, they don't know any better. They've only learned what they've been taught. So we as parents, now maybe we're parents outside of parents in our community, we need to help them. We need to help them.
I have to say, it was very interesting. When my daughter was 3.5 years old, she went to this particular school, and I got a call and to go speak to the teacher. And she said, mind you, my daughter was 3.5, and she said, "Your daughter said the word breast." And I said, "Okay, and what is the problem?" And she said breast. And I said, "Well, what
Mhm.
would you like her to call it?" And she said, "Nothing." I said, "Oh, I see. So ignore it." And she said,
Hmm.
"Yes." And I said, "Well, in our house, we use anatomically correct terms. We don't use the derogatory terms at all. And they're offensive to me. I'm not a prude by any, or you've established that by now. I mean, in this conversation that we've been having, I'm not a prude. But I also, those are gross, those are gross words. They're belittling to women and men. So we use the correct terms." And I said, "Did she do something weird?" And she said, "Yes, she lifted up her shirt and she showed us her breasts." And I went, "You mean those little dots that she's got going on at 3.5?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, that's terribly offensive." I said, "That's it? That's all you got?" Like, that's hysterical to me. That's what little kids do. But now you're ignoring the
Mm,
human body and making it dirty.
mm,
Shame on you.
mm,
And that's part of grooming later on. She's dirty. Now she's set up. And now this is really maybe too much, but I think it's important because she set the stage for those children that you're dirty and you're
Mhm.
not. So when my daughter got her period, I called my husband and I said, "You have to bring home yellow flowers, not red, she's not your date, but yellow friendship." He goes, "You're kidding me." I said, "No, it's not dirty. It's normal. Weird for us because it's uncomfortable, but you're going to bring them home, and then we're taking her out to dinner to celebrate." So when we went out, she's 9 years old. That's right, she was 9. And the waiter said, "Are you celebrating anything special?" She goes, "I got my period." It was adorable. But I mean, most people were like, "Oh, it's so." But in our house, normal. And I was, and the hubby was just like ready to crawl underneath the table. But for her, normal. For he and I, this is not how we were raised. Everything's dirty, 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 right? But that teacher set the tone for the rest of my raising. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be weird, but she set the tone. They're breasts. Well, we don't call them anything. It was so odd. And I thought, that's it. She's grooming, but not realizing it.
Yeah.
So sorry that I interrupted, but it just
No, no, no. This is important. That's a very important message because repetitive, what you just brought up is that repetition of information that elicits an emotional and psychological thought process will ultimately be translated into future behavior.
and I
And
wanted her to know that home was safe.
absolutely.
mm, mm, mm,
Yeah, and that's important. It's that repet she's going to be exposed, kids are going to be exposed to repetitive information that their mind, because minds, the children's minds soak up information, but those repetition of information that comes from trusted sources have so much impact, especially from teachers and adults in their lives. So even though we may not, we may not do it intentionally, we unfortunately have been guilty of putting that information into the children's
Psyche.
psyche. Yeah, I'm so sorry.
I nipped that crap in the bud.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
I've The one thing I've noticed with all of us actually is because of society, we're trying to get out of the dirtiness language or making it normal that people have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. You have to be okay with having this conversation with children about their bodies. You have to be like you was mentioning earlier, Nancy, when with the guys coming out of incarceration, don't vomit on me, but you need to know how to conduct yourself. Lamar, we're talking to 14-year-old boys about changing their mindset, reprogramming what their interests are. Standing on the corner with your boys that's a recipe for disaster, you know. But the same thing, you know, with buyers, guys aren't interested in somebody who knows their body. They're interested in somebody that don't know who they are. In all of the situations that we've talked about, even you, Paul, on the forced labor side, if you know yourself, then the odds of you falling victim goes down drastically.
Hmm.
And we as parents and we as people in our neighborhoods, in our communities, that's the reinforcement that needs to happen, that we're asking, you know, our network and everybody we know to do is reinforce to the younger generation who they are, who we see them as. And even when you come, you know, if you get in trouble for some whatever reason, you serve your time. When you get back into society, you gotta now know who you are, not who you was, but who
Hmm.
are you now? You know, to make a positive impact on what's going on in the world, and that's how we stamp out trafficking. That's how we make a dent. Is getting everybody to know who they are and what part they play in this world, and you know.
A value.
Yeah, giving them value back
Yes,
because value was taken away, whether it's taken away from as a teenager or whether it's taken away as an adult, we've got to give that value back. And once they have that value, now they look at life through a totally different lens.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And can you imagine being in prison? And I mean, the guards are not helpful. Believe me, they are not helpful at all with giving that value at any credibility. I mean, the way that they treated me as an officer, the guards, and I wasn't incarcerated, was disgusting. And the way that they left me in um, unbelievably dangerous situations when I needed help, I can't imagine what they did to people who had no voice and no way to escape. I mean, it just, and no wonder these people come out broken. It is awful. And I don't condone what they did, not the guards. I mean, the crime, but as you said, they served their time. It's over. Now let's forget it and allow people to move on. But when you constantly throw this crap in their face over and over and over, how do I heal? It's
Hmm.
God. I mean, how often are you going to punish me for the same thing? I did my time. It's enough. But now I'm exhausted. I'm just exhausted. I'm so beaten down. I was beaten down in prison. I was beaten down growing up, and now I'm beaten down by society because I just can't catch a break. And now the cops know who I am,
Yeah.
and now they keep pulling me over because somehow I fit the profile. Well, how do I fit the profile? Well, I just happen to be Hispanic. I happen to be tatted. I mean, that's not good enough. Sorry.
Yeah. And getting back to your point, Isaac, especially about the youth, it's sad when we have, now they use 14 and 15-year-olds to traffic themselves.
Right.
We have 14 and 15-year-olds that carry drugs because they aren't going to get incarcerated as long as someone who's an adult. So they're using kids to do these kind of things, but they're getting the records are being tarnished at an early age. And we have to start looking at the whys. And it goes back to, again, what Paul was talking about, is because that's fitting that, what do you want to call it? What's the word? Logistics. That's the word I'm trying to. It's fitting the logistics to keep the import and the export going. Okay, so we'll just use 14-year-olds now, because they're expendable, and you can just turn them around like crazy, and you give them $100 every time they do something. That's a lot of money to a 14-year-old, and they're doing it 5 times a day. That's $500 until they get caught. It's a whirlwind, but we have to remember that when these kids are coming out, that they were 14 years old and they were duped into believing that this is the way it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Lamar, you've also mentioned one of the things you mentioned Vanguard University, and just for disclosure, I'm also an instructor teacher there at Vanguard, and I also uh, and they have this really good program that brings the students because together when school districts have a hard time talking about the subject, both on the sex trafficking side, but also the labor trafficking side. Um, they bring the students to Vanguard, and in Vanguard, they actually have a um, program that talks about human trafficking, and that's the Global Center for Women and Justice. And Sandy Morgan and Derek Marsh. By the way, Derek Marsh was the original founder of the Orange County Human Trafficking Task Force, along with
Mm,
Sandy. Um, they they um, they actually have a way to speak to um, the younger audience, a plan that actually and Anaheim PD, the OCHTTF is also part of that. So that is that example is, I think, a model that I haven't seen done elsewhere, and I think it's one of those great models that you mentioned, that I think uh, allows for this hard subject to be taught in schools, but also in its in both its in both I guess a preventative setting. We want to prevent them from being exploited and so on, but also in a way that is a teaching subject, and we need to talk about the history of slavery and how human trafficking is slavery, and how this concept is actually used in many ways. So I think that in itself, because a school setting, and not just early, because I think, when students first encounter this topic of slavery, where they hear about the transatlantic slavery and chattel slavery, and this is one of the darkest part of our history. Um, However, they're not taught about how peonage, the other systems work, and in many cases, either their loved ones or they themselves are perhaps trafficked, in many cases. Uh, uh, you'll see large segments of unaccompanied minors in the school system, probably in the school systems in Orange County, in especially in the Santa Ana areas. Um, you can see maybe this is where I think schools can take extra precautions to reach out to both the students, but also their family members, to show that it's not just it's not just a that they're the students are at risk, but their entire family might be at risk, and there is a way to reach out, and if they feel that they have that vulnerability or they are being trafficked. I think that message needs to be clear for the students, and I think that what you highlighted is that great need, and thank you for that work.
Yeah, there currently is a collaboration between Vanguard and Higher Ground. It started last summer, and Jesse Payne is the new CEO at Higher Ground. He's been there now, I think, 2 years already. But he has brought together some wonderful ideas. And so there is a background of collaboration that's going on between both of us. And Vanguard was able to do something wonderful earlier this year. I wasn't able to attend that, which has explored more information. And we brought in people and parents at a huge event in South County, in Orange County. And then we also did one here in Costa Mesa again. And so it's getting out. And I think it's I don't want to um, make it seem like no one wants to do it, but I'm just trying to say that it's working now and that people are becoming more aware and that there's a system in place.
Great, thank you. So I think we are at time. Uh,
Well,
any,
we have a few minutes for Isaac,
oh,
don't we?
Isaac, yes. Isaac, please.
Well, I was gonna say we're you know getting ready to close it out. If Nancy or Lamar have something closing that they would like the audience to hear, um, powerful enough to create that action and that stirring as they've they've listened to us here, and you get that yearning inside. What would you want to say to someone, Nancy, that has that fire burning right now? What kind of direction would you want to give them?
The big picture that we've been talking about. And when people look at it, I think sometimes folks feel overwhelmed. And if you want to do something and you're feeling that way, um, we look at our little part of society, our little corner, and starting small is huge. Starting with conversations is huge, and teaching our children how to speak to strangers or to each other is is so valuable. Teaching children and adults that a complete sentence is no, period. No explanation. No, thank you. When you go to the doctor and the doctor's arguing with you, doctor, I believe I said no. No is a complete sentence. And those things are very valuable because I have value. If somebody comes up to me and says, hey, let me carry your groceries. No, thank you. Oh, you're one of those. I don't know what one of those means. I don't need to engage with you. I said no because he's preying on my vulnerability as a female because I've been raised to be cordial and kind. That's how we are raised, to be good little girls. And that's what the predator's looking for. And that's what they look for, that kindness and that vulnerability. And that's what they prey on. And that's how we become victims. And we just go, what the heck happened? How did I become a victim? Because you're nice. And you still can be nice, but you also have to learn how to say no. You can say no, thank you, but the answer is no, and walk
That's
away.
awesome. Yeah, I like that. The power of no. Lamar, what
All
will you
right.
close us out with?
The power of information. In 2023 to 2024, Higher Ground's Human Prevention program reached 9,000 students, totaling more than 12,000 students since its implementation. The turnaround has been phenomenal. So before, when you talk to students, 38% of students thought they knew how to identify human trafficking. After going through our program, 80% students knew really how to identify what human trafficking was. Before, no one knew. There was 43% knew what the warning signs were. Afterwards, 82% knew what the warning signs were. And the 39% before knew how to report human trafficking and to get help. And then afterwards, 80% knew how to report and where to get help. I think information is everything. Um, I did not, I should have gotten some contact information, but Waymakers is probably the best way to reach any of the multiple facets of helping people in recovery and in human trafficking. So I would suggest anyone out there that if they have any questions, or they just want to make a phone call and ask some questions about it, I would contact Waymakers.
Awesome. That's great. And I will say I've mentioned this a few times, but talk to your network.
Mm.
Let's not let this subject be taboo. Let's talk about it. Guys, talk about it after the conference meeting. Ladies, talk about it to your husbands. Ask them the hard questions. Let's talk about it. Talk about it. And the more we talk about what trafficking is, talk about what is happening in our neighborhoods, the more we got people understanding, yes, we've been in denial. It is happening here. Sorry, it is happening in our schools. Yeah, I probably work with somebody who may not be doing what they supposed to be doing or should not be around kids or need help because the way they look at ladies and young ladies. We have to talk about that and be authentic about, bringing the subject up and discussion at the end of the day. Mr. Paul, I'm gonna leave it to you to close us because
Thank
we
you.
are 2 minutes from.
Okay. And we've heard so many powerful stories and also experiences of both Nancy and Lamar and also Isaac. We also, this is one of those um, things that the issue is going to be touchy. It's going to be hard. It's not one of those human trafficking is not a easy subject to talk to your child about in both uh, on the sex trafficking exploitation side, but also the historical slavery side of it. But unfortunately, this is the society that we live in. The more we shelter, sometimes the greater the risk we tend to create. And what all the your messages have shown is we learn from each other, but also um, we need to also understand that running away from it is not a way to address it. And this also goes to the image that we put on ourselves. That tough guy image sometimes is not that. It does not, is not a tough guy image. We need to be approach it in a way where it is what it is right now, and we need to just understand we need to approach this not from a blinders side. We need to approach it so that the true evil nature of this heinous crime can be prevented by first acknowledging it. It's out there. And with that, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank
Y'all
you.
have a good weekend.